Welcome to our next Resilience and Possibility series. I'm Lynn Twist. I'm here with Bill Twist, and we're very delighted that you're here today. This is a Pachamama Lines call, part of the Resilience and Possibility series we've been doing since the beginning of the pandemic. And very grateful to have Andres interpreting for those of you who speak Spanish. Thank you for allowing me to speak English. I wish I spoke Spanish. Sorry about that. So we have a couple hundred people on this call and more people joining every minute. Also, more people who will be listening to this recording. Let me say that we always begin this community of souls with a meditation. And I'm going to do that also today. We call it Opening Sacred Space. And I want to particularly acknowledge today, given the topic that we're going to be talking about, which has to do with the law, that we acknowledge Ruth Bader Ginsburg's passing, a woman who lived and breathed the rule of law all her 87 years, probably when she was born. She could have graduated from law school. And as a member of the Supreme Court, as a fierce advocate for the rights of women and underserved people, she also would love this conversation about the rights of nature. So if you feel comfortable doing so, please close your eyes and we'll be silent for a moment in honor of her passing and her 87 years of service to our country and to our world, and then I'll read a quote. So let's close our eyes for a moment. We are each other's immortality. Each of us a skein of lives stretching forward and backward in time and through history, connecting everyone who came before us, everyone we have known, and everyone who will come after us. We carry each other back and forth from the thresholds of life and death. Some part of those we loved will now be gone forever. And some part is ours to have, to hold, to honor, to respect, and to carry on for them, to make this world real, good, honest, and true. And now some words that I think Ruth Bader Ginsburg would say to us if she were able to speak to us now. When I die, if you need to weep, cry for the homeless person walking in the street beside you. And when you need me, put your arms around another and give them what you thought you needed from me. You can honor me most by sharing your blessings and multiplying your contribution to the world. You can respect my legacy most by spreading goodness. You can honor me most by letting me live in your eyes and not in your mind. And when you say prayers for me, remember, love doesn't die. Authenticity doesn't die. Honesty doesn't die. Integrity doesn't die. People do. So when all that's left of me is love, give me away. Let's just be silent for the next few seconds. Okay, open your eyes and join our meeting here. I'm going to say the purpose of our series on resilience and possibility is to inspire all of us to live in a way that's consistent with the mission of the Pachamama Alliance, to bring forth an environmentally sustainable, spiritually fulfilling, and socially just human presence on this planet. And the purpose of today's very, very special conversation is to inspire all of us with the possibility, the rights of nature hold for bringing forth that world. Through real life success stories, we have the opportunity to engage directly with extraordinary people who've made the rights of nature distinction come into existence and be manifest in our world. So that's what we're going to do today. Over to you.
Great. I'm glad we're going to do that. You know, this movement, the Rights of Nature movement, is something that Pachamama Alliance has been involved with really from fairly early on. And it's come a long ways. I remember 10 years ago being derided by journalists for saying, "Oh, you're just trying to give rocks lawyers?" And give me a break. But this year, the Democratic Party in the United States even considered including rights for nature in its formal platform. It wasn't included, but it was a serious conversation about that. And as Lynn said, you know, this initiative, this idea of nature having rights is absolutely essential for us to achieve building the world that we want, where we're regenerating nature, we're building a human relationship with the world that can sustain not only humans but all life. This movement is at the foundation of that. So it's really exciting to have an opportunity to hear from a couple of people who are right on the forefront of making this movement spread around the world. So we're going to hear from two people, and I want to introduce first. I'll introduce each of them, and then we'll hear from Thomas first. But Natalia Green. We call her Natty. She's Ecuadorian. She lives in Quito, and she's the general coordinator, and she's on the executive committee of the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature. And she's also part of the International Secretariat for International Rights of Nature Tribunals. We first met her, I met her when she was the person who was actively involved in Ecuador in 2008 when they were rewriting their constitution, and this idea of rights of nature was presented there. And Natty was just a force of nature, coordinating civil society, coordinating indigenous movement, pulling people together. And I'd say almost as much as the other person who's on this call, she was the driving force for that initiative being included in the Constitution in 2008. So Natty she's a graduate of Hampshire College in the United States. It's where she learned to speak English, and she learned to speak it very quickly. She learned to speak it fast. She has a degree from Flaxo University a master's degree from Flaxo University in Ecuador in political science, and has a master's degree in climate change. She was the president of SEDEMA, which is the national coordinating entity for all the environmental NGOs in Ecuador. And people really follow her lead in the environmental movement. And she's now a key team member for Fundación Pachamama in Ecuador. So we'll hear from Natty in a minute. Natty, welcome I hope you're on here, but welcome to our group. Then the other person we're going to hear from is Thomas Linzey. And Thomas he goes by now, he's the, I think, head legal counsel for the Center for Democratic and Environmental Rights. He's also the founder of the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund. And that organization is the organization that brought rights of nature as a legal concept into the world in 2006 in a community in Pennsylvania adopted a Rights of Nature initiative. It was the first time rights of nature had been formally enshrined in the law, and that was the work of Thomas and his team at the time at the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund. Thomas is also an author. He's written a book called Be the Change, which is a really short and precise guide for for communities to organize together. So Thomas's work is both as a lawyer. He was recognized as one of the most top revolutionary lawyers in the country years back. He's also gotten many awards for his environmental activism, the legal work he's doing around the environment. But part of his work has always been not just legal rights, but community organizing rights. And he's always been at the heart of all of this is democracy and the environment. And his new organization, the Center for Democratic and Economic Rights, is another expression of that. So it's just really great to have these two leaders with us today. And I want to start off by asking Thomas to give us some background on the movement. How did you get involved in it? And what's the kind of philosophical underpinnings and how historical flow of it. So Thomas, thank you for being with us, and Natty, same.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Bill, for that introduction. I think Bill put it well when he said Natty was literally a force of nature. I think that puts it well. And I'm going to hand it off to her after talking for a little bit. So at the beginning, I wanted to thank the Pachamama Alliance for hosting this event, and specifically Bill, Lynne, and Josh and Andres, who are on the line with us today, for making this event happen. And the impetus for this particular event really emanated from the Pachamama Alliance community of Southwest Florida. So I just wanted to recognize Joe Benassia and Gary Robbins, who are part of that Pachamama Alliance community in Southwest Florida, and their work on what we think is the most important ballot initiative that appears on the November ballot this year, which I'm going to be talking about later, in Orange County, Florida. So we're here to talk about recognizing human civil rights type protections for nature. And as Bill referenced, 20 years ago, it was enough to get you laughed off the stage to be talking about rights for nature. So when we value things within Western society so highly, we elevate them to the status of rights. That's how we protect them through the highest protections in Western law. And so that's what we're talking about. We're talking about elevating environmental protection to this human civil rights type level within the system of law. And I think it's important to recognize that we wouldn't be talking about any of this, wouldn't be talking about rights of nature at all, if our existing system of environmental protection was working. So if our existing system of environmental protection was working and functioning to actually protect the environment, probably wouldn't be talking about rights of nature at this point. But the problem is it's not. And the journey that a lot of us have followed in arriving at this rights of nature place has been about trying to make the existing system work. So making the Clean Water Act work and the Clean Air Act work in the United States, and appealing permits that are issued by state agencies to corporations trying to put in everything from frack wells to large-scale factory hog farms to toxic waste incinerators. So kind of a journey that many of us have followed is from trying to make that stuff work, to actually stop those harmful projects from coming into unwilling communities who don't want those projects there, trying to make those environmental laws work to actually stop those projects. And my journey, which was similar to probably other environmental lawyers, other people come to this place differently. As Bill mentioned, my journey started back in 1995, ancient history, 1995. When I founded the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund, so CELDEF for short, public interest law firm. I've since left CELDEF to create the Center for Democratic and Environmental Rights to focus exclusively down on rights of nature work. But for 10 years at CELDEF, we devoted ourselves to trying to make the existing system of environmental law and regulations work. And that usually consisted of us representing, we had about 100 client community-based organizations that were trying to stop these various projects across rural Pennsylvania. And those pathways always ended up in a courtroom, whether in front of an administrative law judge on a regulatory question or in front of a court trying to enforce the Clean Air Act or the Clean Water Act or this nation's, the US environmental laws. And there were a bunch of lessons that came out of those 10 years that we had, this frustration over a 10-year period of time trying to make stuff work. Because there's a lot of mythology around this nation's environmental laws, that they're actually about protecting the natural environment. It always sounds funny to say, but this nation's environmental laws really aren't about protecting the natural environment. They're about shaving some of the rough edges off of really bad projects, but they're not really about stopping environmental harm. And so these are the lessons that we learned during those 10 years, is that the regulated industries, the corporations that are attempting to get a permit to put something in, a frack well, a toxic waste incinerator, factory farm, whatever the project is, they actually write the regulations. We always pretend that environmental agencies, the state agencies, are the ones actually writing the regulations, but that's not the way it works. And, you know, in the hour before dawn or whatever, we have honest thoughts to ourselves, that we know that there's a system that's not really run by us. It's run by others who are writing these regulations and these laws. Secondly, when these permits are issued for these projects, the burden is on communities to finance a fight to them. It's not on the corporations to actually finance those fights. It's on the burden shifts to the community to fight those permit issuances. And one thing we learned doing these permit issuances as well is that we at least thought we were costing some of these industries or corporations money. But in the end, we learned that the monies that the corporations spend opposing communities who are trying to stop these projects from coming in, the monies are tax deductible to the corporations to hire the lawyers to fight communities who are actually trying to stop these harmful corporate projects from coming in. So even if we would win during those 10 years of doing traditional conventional environmental law, the corporations we were facing off against, the industries, would simply go back and rewrite the law. So we would find a way to win these permit appeals and legal actions, but then the corporations would simply go back to the legislature and change the law to close the loophole that we had found to actually win on behalf of these community groups. I don't think it comes as any surprise, or it shouldn't come to any surprise on this people on this phone call, that we're in worse shape now environmentally than we were 40 years ago before the major environmental laws were adopted in the United States. We're in worse shape now than 40 years ago. And some people at the events where we speak will put up their hand and say, well, that's not true. Rivers don't catch on fire anymore like they did 40 years ago, to which we say, well, if that's our metric, you know, if that's how we're measuring things, then we're in real trouble, that rivers don't catch on fire anymore. And I think just to finish out this little segment on the 10 years of practice that we did, trying to enforce conventional environmental laws, that someone said to me, 15 years ago, that I finally began to understand a year or so after she said it. She said, the only thing that environmental regulations regulate are environmentalists, because they make us predictable as to how we fight when these projects come into our community, because the corporate boys have written the regulations which define what our defense looks like when we come into the community. So it's kind of like a giant hamster wheel, or as someone compared it to the, when you go to the fairgrounds, you play something called whack-a-mole, which is, you put your quarter in and you pay your ticket, and then you whack the mole, and then a different one pops up, and you whack that one, and eventually you can't do them all. And it's like when we were busy trying to stop one thing, 6 new toxic waste incinerators went in eastern Pennsylvania. It's an endless battle, and in many ways, it's set up to be an endless battle. It's intended to be an endless battle that we get drawn into, but this is what conventional traditional environmental law is today. And so we got to a point where we began to re-examine what we were doing. We basically quit. I quit doing regulatory law, quit trying to enforce the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act. And it led us to kind of rethink what environmental law was. And that brought us all the way back around to this Western system of law that we have today. So this Western system of law today sees things like nature and ecosystems as dead, as inanimate objects. The Western system of law is much different than the indigenous system of law, which sees nature as animated. Not inanimate, but animated. So it's basically living versus dead kind of vision of how stuff is from this Western system of law perspective. And the rights of nature stuff is really this collision between an inanimate version of nature and ecosystem and the earth and the world, and a living version of ecosystems and the earth and the world. That's rights of nature is really a collision between those two. And we see that animate or living nature vision of indigenous peoples. You know, the Ponca Nation in Oklahoma speaks about speaking for those without voices. And the White Earth Nation, the Chippewa, the Ojibwe in Minnesota, speak about representing the flying people and the swimming people and the singing people. It's an animated version. It's an animated view of where we are, vantage point. And the Yurok people in California talk about the Klamath River being a living being. They recently recognized the Klamath as having rights within the tribal construct. Now, contrast that with the European system, this Western system of law. And I think the quote that does it the best is from Sir Francis Bacon, who said, "Our job is to torture nature on a rack, to extract her secrets." Torture nature on a rack, and again, put that next to the indigenous value system of animated, and put the two together, and you'd see no similarity between the two. So in 1972, as we were re-examining or rethinking the environmental law stuff, we ran across a University of Southern California law professor named Christopher Stone. And Christopher Stone in 1972 had written a law review article called "Should Trees Have Standing?" Basically positing that ecosystems and nature should have standing in court to be able to use our legal institutions to pursue claims and defend themselves against projects that would damage nature. And it was kind of the perfect storm. Christopher Stone put this law review article out. The Supreme Court was reviewing a case at that time called Sierra Club versus Morton. The particulars of it aren't important, except to say that the Walt Disney Company wanted to put a ski resort in Mineral King Valley in the Sierra Nevada mountains on the eastern side of California. And it was going to be huge. It was going to be bigger than Disneyland to put this thing in. Sierra Club tried to stop it. They sued to try to stop it, and they got kicked out of court because the court said, "We're sorry, you don't meet our entry requirements to defend this land because you don't have standing. You haven't been injured. And our legal system requires people to show that they've been physically injured or injured in some way, been harmed in some way to be able to cross the courthouse steps." And the court said, "We're sorry, you haven't been harmed by this development of the land." To which the Supreme Court then heard the case. Justice William O. Douglas, one of the Supreme Court justices, picked up Christopher Stone's law review article and basically wrote a dissenting opinion that I don't think has been seen in the last, opinion of the Supreme Court in the last 1,000 years, whatever, in that he wrote that, and this is a quote, "The critical question of standing would be simplified and also put neatly in focus if we fashioned a federal rule that allowed environmental issues to be litigated before federal agencies or federal courts in the name of the inanimate object about to be despoiled, defaced, or invaded by roads and bulldozers, and where injury is the subject of public outrage." So first time the bare glimmer of rights of nature kind of stuff, access to the courts by ecosystems, not by humans, but by humans speaking on behalf of ecosystems and allowing them direct access to the court. I think that's the first place in non-indigenous circles, understanding that nature not being property has been an indigenous concept for tens of thousands of years. This is the first time it really breached in terms of, for want of a better word, white Western legal system circles. And so we took that concept of ecosystems having standing and some degree of rights to prosecute those in court themselves. And it happened to intersect with a community that we were working with in northeastern Pennsylvania called Tamaqua Borough back in 2006. And the Tamaqua Borough was faced with a dumping project of PCB-laden dredge from the Delaware River. They were dredging the river to make it deeper for boat traffic. They had to put the dredge someplace, and they determined they were going to put it in this small community of 7,000 people, basically fill in old mine holes with this PCB dredge. And they came to us and said, we're not interested in being a toilet for Delaware and Pennsylvania, as they do this dredging project with this PCB dredge in, we want to stop it. And we want you to help us draft a local law that actually bans this kind of dumping from happening. And at the same time, the trout fishermen in Tamaqua Borough said, well, wait a minute, it's not just us that would be affected as humans, as people. It's the rivers and the streams here, the Wabash, the Panther Creeks, the Little Schuylkill River, which supplies Philadelphia with drinking water. And we said, well, what do you want us to do? We know how to draft one, we don't know how to draft the other. And they said, well, we want you to recognize rights for these rivers, because we had been talking with them about, the dissenting opinion, just William O. Douglas, Sarah Clifford Morton, and this whole new area of law. And so they became the first in the world to adopt a rights of nature law that recognized the rivers and streams within Tamaqua as having the right to exist, flourish, and naturally evolve. So basically, constitutional type standards for ecosystems, for waterways, specifically in Tamaqua Borough, constitutionally based standards that are akin to these human rights type standards, civil rights type protections that we have in the Western system of law. So that was 2006. And then we got this weird phone call from a guy named Bill Twist, which I almost hung up on it twice during the course of those phone calls. But he said, hey, there's something happening in Ecuador, and we just calling to find out if you'd like to help with what's happening there with this new constitutional process. And so I'm going to hand it off to Natty, who was integrally involved in the Ecuadorian constitutional process. And it may sound like hyperbole at times, but I think Natty is probably one of the most effective organizers that we've worked with around the globe. And so with that, I'd like to turn it over to Natty to pick up the story.
Natty. Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you, Tom. And thank you for that introduction. And thank you, Bill and Lynne, for putting up this space into the Pachamama Alliance. I do have to say that the first time that I heard this crazy idea of rights of nature was also from this same person, from Bill Twist, who was talking about it for Ecuador. And for me, it was just this crazy idea that has actually led my whole work during the past 12 years. So thank you, Bill, for that inspiration and for putting up, for pushing us to lead the debate during the Constitutional Assembly. That was quite interesting, and I'm going to start with the Constitutional Assembly so I can continue with what Tom was saying. It was an important and really amazing time in the time of Ecuadorian history, where we had decided to rewrite our constitution, which is not new in Ecuador. We had rewritten it for many times, but this time we were finishing up a whole period of a lot of instability, political instability, and Ecuador was really aiming for something new. We were aiming for something important. We wanted a change, and I think that that all the stars got together in that moment, because there was this will. We had started the Yasuni ITT initiative that meant to leave all underground. We were the scene of a really catastrophe. There was the Texaco, Chevron Texaco oil spill in the Amazon. And we really wanted something different. We realized as Ecuador that we were really biodiverse. And I think that it was the right moment where people were really open to the idea of rights of nature. And yes, indeed, we did participate in the assembly. We did a lot of lobbying. Tom and Mary came to Ecuador. We went there. We talked to many assembly members. We spoke about the idea of rights of nature. And what I think was the best part of the assembly was that the assembly members took it and said, okay, how do we manage this idea? How do we convince people that rights of nature is the way to go? And I remember one conversation where we said, Ecuador is a country that has a lot of indigenous population, and the Constitution has always been a tool managed by the Westerns. A tool that does not reflect the indigenous sentiment, the indigenous culture. And if we recognize nature rights, then we're making this constitution more democratic, because we're including part of the cosmovision of indigenous people that consider that nature is a subject of rights, that nature is our mother. So it will be a way to incorporate the cosmovision of indigenous people into the constitution and make it more democratic. So it was quite an important moment in time, because we at the beginning thought that we were going to just include this at the debate, that it was important for people to understand that nature is not a way, that is not a separate entity, that we are over nature, but that we're part of nature. And if we achieve to just start the dialogue and start having assembly members talk about it, that will be a success. But not only was it a success, but 97 out of the 116 assembly members voted in favor of recognizing that nature is a subject of rights. And yes, indeed, in 2008, thanks to the work of so many people that I don't want to even start mentioning because it's a very long list. But of course, I want to mention those who are here in the call. We were able to promote the recognition of rights of nature, and Ecuador recognized 4 important rights in the Constitution. It recognized that nature has a right to exist, to regenerate, to maintain its natural cycles, structures, functions, and evolutionary processes, and to have an integral restoration. This is key because it's the first country that recognized in the constitutional level that nature is not an object that we can destroy and exploit. That nature is a person that we need to respect and whose rights need to be guaranteed. And I remember, Bill, when we went to the US, I feel like 2 years later, and we had Fox News covering our event, and Fox News said something like, "Can you believe these hippies saying that nature has the right to exist?" And I always think about that, because I cannot believe, and we are here 12 years later, of course, thinking that nature has the right to exist, because if nature doesn't exist, we don't exist. So I'm really glad that we're having this conversation at this time in the middle of a global pandemic, because if we don't understand the message that nature is giving us, and the nature is telling us to react, the nature is telling us that we need to recognize that she's alive, that she's a living entity, and that she can do like this and just get rid of us completely. If we don't listen to her message, then we are completely wrong. And I feel this is an amazing moment to recognize that nature is a subject of rights and that we need a new paradigm. And the fortunate tool is that rights of nature is a tool that can help us transit towards a space, towards an understanding that nature is a subject of rights, that nature has to be on the table of negotiations when we start a project, that we need to understand what is the impact that we have on nature, and that what are we doing on nature, and that we need to define all our policies, understanding if nature will be able to regenerate itself, if nature will be able to maintain its natural cycles, and if nature is not able to do that, then maybe those activities should not be done by by human beings. So I think this is quite an important moment, because people say, well, let's go back to normality, but normality was the problem. So how do we change that normality? We're in an amazing time where we can actually change that normality. And fortunately, the rights of nature movement has grown so much, has been expanding in so many ways, that we are finally understanding that nature has a moment. So I remember, Tom, when you used to say that you used to compare nature with slavery, you know, and the nature is a slave. Well, yes, nature is a slave still in many, many countries. And we need to move forward, understanding and listening to the voice of nature, like women did with the women's movement, with the abolitionist movement, with slavery, what happened with indigenous people, and the collective movement that recognized collective rights. Law is not straight. Law is not, it can definitely change, and law needs to be adapted to this understanding that we are in the midst of the worst climate and biological crisis, the 6th mass extinction. And if we don't do something right now, then we might not have another opportunity. And of course, this is the right moment to give nature rights. And it's happening. And I'm really glad that we have a big public here, because it's happening, and people need to know that it's happening. It needs to be on the media, and it needs to be, people need to be covering this, because it's happening around the world. And we think about what's happening with the pandemic, and the pandemic is due to a virus, and our forests are the best antivirus that we can have. If we don't protect those forests, you know, another pandemic is going to come very soon and really get rid of us. So how do we listen to the message of nature? Is definitely by recognizing that nature has rights. We are actually September 2010. we created Garn with Bill and with Tom and with some others. I see Cormac is here in the call, and I appreciate also his participation because it was key. His writings and everything were key to develop this idea of earth jurisprudence. We need a new jurisprudence, a jurisprudence that considers nature laws as real laws into our legal systems. And many and people around the world have been able to incorporate this into their legal systems in many ways. We have been fortunate enough to incorporate this in our constitution, but that's not the case for all countries that don't change constitution as easy as we do. And other countries have been able to incorporate it into local ordinances. As Tom was mentioning, in the US, you guys have 5 indigenous-led victories, one of the Ponca nations that Tom was mentioning. There are people around the world. The Sami nation, for example, in Sweden has recognized nature rights. In the Wanganui River, for example, in New Zealand, was recognized as a subject of rights. So there are many different ways of recognizing nature rights, either for an ecosystem, within an ordinance, within a constitution, within a law. There are many cities in Mexico, for example, that have recognized that the city of Mexico, for example, it recognizes the rights of nature. So there are many amazing, beautiful ways to develop this idea, taking in consideration the context in which you're living. And I see that Josh has shared, and I'm going to share a bit more of our websites. GARN was actually the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature, was an organization that was created 10 years ago. I was sharing some of the pictures with Bill and Tom the other day, in which we are much younger. But 10 years ago, we created this movement, and we created it as an idea of we need to promote this. And it's amazing how much it has grown. If Josh, you can help me share the screen, I can just show you a little graph that shows how much the movement has grown. And if you see from 1995 until 2019, we're updating it right now until 2020. It's amazing how many more like journal articles, court cases, conferences, tribunals, constitutions, regional provisions have grown, and how much the movement has grown. You can see it in this graph, and we're updating it to 2020, that the world is finally understanding that nature has rights and that we need to recognize those rights. You can stop sharing, Josh. Thank you for that. I just wanted to show how much this has grown. 58 countries right now have existing or pending cases on rights of nature. 180 legal provisions of nature rights have been recognized around the world. Most of them are local provisions, 58 at a national level, 5 tribal ones, and 1 international one. So it's very interesting to understand how much this movement has grown. From the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature has also grown a lot. We are developing these hubs. So there's a European hub, a Latin American hub, an indigenous hub, a youth hub. Cormac wants to promote an African hub, and people all over the world are thinking about it. Macron, the president of France, talked about rights of nature, that this is the moment for rights of nature. So big leaders at the UN, at many countries, as Bill mentioned, even in the US, are talking about this is the new idea, and this what we need to do to move forward. And we are also moving things in real court. For example, here in Ecuador, we just presented a couple of weeks ago an amicus curiae, that is an amicus brief with many organizations, with the Erie Law Center, with the Center for Biological Diversity, International Rivers, and the Great Lakes Environmental Law Center. So the Constitutional Court can recognize and move forward rights of nature cases, in this case for Los Cedros. So there's a lot of work in practice. If you see the Rights of Nature website that I shared in Spanish, that is the last one, we have more than 33 cases in Ecuador where we have legal provisions for rights of nature cases in Ecuador. Some of them are quite good. Some of them we have been able to stop a hydroelectric plant, for example, from a river that was going to drive some species into extinction. Right now, we are in the midst of a case that we're trying to stop a big open pit mine in the Valley of Intac. That is a really biodiverse and amazing place where 2 species of frogs have been discovered that are the last in their gender. So scientists say that it's like discovering a dinosaur, and we're trying to use that dinosaur to try to stop a open pit mine a project that is legal in our system, but that is going to violate rights of nature. And we're putting that into the court, saying you have to ponderate the rights, and the right to life and the right to nature is more important because species are going to go extinct. So that's we're driving this into legal cases, and it's an amazing way because we're writing amicus briefs all the time. And of course, environmental disasters keep on happening, but we are advancing with the idea of rights of nature, and it's happening all over the world. We now have our first master's degree on rights of nature and peace, and the world is moving towards this idea. So I just want to, I think we're going to have more time to discuss this, but I want to really thank Bill for pushing us towards this idea. Thank everybody who makes the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature, and everybody who has promoted the Rights of Nature movement, because back in 2010, when we met in Bolivia, when there was the People's Conference on Climate Change and the Rights of Mother Earth, the Universal Declaration of the Rights of Mother Earth was written. And now, 10 years later, we are really promoting it to become part of the UN system. There's a program called the UN Harmony with Nature Dialogue and program in the UN. And this is happening. And I really encourage people to learn more about it, to learn about the cases, to learn about the movement, to engage in the movement, and to bring rights of nature legislation into your local ordinance, into your country, into the place that you live, into recognizing. I was talking to Valerie Cabanes this morning, and she was saying that Paris is trying to recognize the rights of the River Seine. So it's happening, and I hope that this encourages all people to really work and promote the idea of rights of nature, because its time has come, like we said 10 years ago. Thank you so much.
Say that again. No.
Do I?
I just unmuted.
Yeah, thank you, Natty. Hey, Thomas, do you have anything to add about some of the projects you're working on, or more examples of how this is spreading in the U.S. or internationally?
Yeah, just I've told Natty to her face before, but she has more energy in her little pinky than I do most days. In a chronological sense, the work in Ecuador really boomeranged back into the U.S. And so we worked with the city of Pittsburgh in 2010 to become the largest municipality in the United States to adopt a rights of nature law to protect the Ohio, Allegheny, Monongahela rivers in the city of Pittsburgh. And then to date, we have about 36 communities in the United States that have passed rights of nature laws. And they include a couple of communities in Pennsylvania where we got our first taste. Natty was talking about working in the courts and filing briefs. Got our first case of trying to intervene on behalf of a creek and a watershed. So basically, bends our brains sometimes to think about this stuff, but a creek and a watershed in Pennsylvania making a motion to intervene in a lawsuit to protect their rights within that existing lawsuit. So that was the first time, at least, that we represented or intervened on behalf of those ecosystems. And then people may have heard about the Lake Erie Bill of Rights. Folks in the city of Toledo passed a Bill of Rights to protect Lake Erie. Natty touched on some of the tribal work in the U.S. as well, but the Ho-Chunk tribe in 2015 in Wisconsin was the first tribe in the U.S. to integrate rights of nature provisions into their tribal laws. The Ponca in Oklahoma, the Ojibwe or Chippewa Anishinaabe people in Minnesota, who passed a rights of nature law that we helped them draft on wild rice. So wild rice is a cultural staple of the Anishinaabe people, and recognizing rights of wild rice, or Manuman as it's known within the Chippewa. And then the Menominee, protecting the Menominee River through the Menominee tribal laws. The Yurok in Northern California, protecting the Klamath River, recognizing rights for the Klamath. And most recently, folks may not have heard about this one, but the Nez Perce in Idaho passed a resolution recognizing the rights of the Snake River. So the Snake River, which travels along the boundary of the reservation. So that is a lot. All of this is laid the groundwork for even more to happen. Like what's happening in Florida at this point with rights of nature stuff, but it's all very exciting.
I remember when this, in 2008, when this idea was being introduced in Ecuador, there was a lot of resistance from the indigenous movement initially. It's like their thought was, wait a minute, this sounds like another crazy white man idea. Obviously, nature has rights. To say that you're going to give nature rights, that's constrictive thinking. But one of the things I remember once they recognized, well, wait a minute, what's destroying nature is the legal system that the white man has created. So let's use it to protect nature. And when the indigenous people got on board, that was one of the main things that sailed it to success in Ecuador. But it's wonderful hearing all the things you're talking about, Tom, now with the indigenous movement really taking it on, because when they've taken it on, then it really does get a lot of momentum and validity behind it.
Yeah, it's been really interesting. We're keynoting the Tribal Environmental Law Summit for Region 10 this week on Thursday. And so it's engaged us in another conversation about how these rights of nature laws can be enforced extra-jurisdictionally. So it's not like when the tribe passes these, that the tribe is saying, hey, we're out of alignment with these rights that we've recognized. It's really about enforcing them against projects outside the reservation. So for the Ojibwe in Minnesota, it's like the oil pipeline, the pipeline that's crossing above the reservation. It's technically off-reservation land. But the pipeline itself is carrying oil, and oil is exacerbating climate change, and wild rice is becoming extinct or being driven further north because of climate change. So the question is, how do we use rights of nature laws extra-jurisdictionally outside of certain jurisdictions past it? Like in Pittsburgh, we talked with the city council about enforcing it against fracking companies who are putting fracking chemicals into the water upstream where no rights of nature law exists, but it's violating the rights of the rivers as they flow into the municipal boundary of the city of Pittsburgh. So more thought about how we can use it as an extension of tribal sovereignty. In other words, that the two are not disconnected, they're the same, because it's about the tribe having sovereignty over their own processes and own land by enforcing these rights of nature laws outside of the reservation or outside of the traditional tribal lands. And I think that argument is the main reason why tribes in the U.S. have been moving with rights of nature laws.
That's great. Hey, Natty, could you also, I know you're on the Secretariat for the International Rights of Nature Tribunals. Could you just explain a little bit about what's going on with that, how that's being done around?
And thank you for asking about that. We have actually organized, in 2013, when we realized that we had promoted rights of nature recognition in Ecuador, but that not much was happening around the world, we decided to take upon civil society's strength and power to do rights of nature tribunals. As what happened during the early wars in Europe, where the governments were not recognizing the crime of genocide, for example, and people took on those courts, we decided to take on something, a subsidiary role as civil society to what governments were not doing. And we made up these tribunals, these rights of nature international tribunals, where we have heard more than 40 cases of violations of rights of nature around the world. And it's a very interesting space because we have very specially gathered people from all over the world with with an ethical and moral authority to be our judges. And we have presented cases from around the world that have led to verdicts that have been used by people as jurisprudence to advance rights of nature, because we have been looking at these environmental problems through the lenses and the perspective of rights of nature and the perspective of what's happening to the guardians of rights of nature that are also being persecuted. So we have actually organized 5 international tribunals, 2 regional tribunals, and 8 local tribunals from 2014 up to now. And they have been a really great success. Actually, due to the pandemic, we just organized an online hearing due to the fires that are happening in the Amazon, especially in the Chiquitania in Bolivia. And it was quite an important hearing that actually the authorities do listen to, because we raise a lot of press because of these amazing and important people that are our judges listening to these cases, and we create real verdicts around these cases that are quite important. We're actually organizing one tribunal for aquatic ecosystems for Europe. And this is quite important because it's pretty much like showing what nature should be, how nature should be dealt with in a case in a court. And that has been quite important. And of course, the voice of indigenous people have been very present, especially the guardians as guardians of nature that have been very persecuted. But I have to say that this, when we hear people that are part of GARN, like Tom Goldtooth, talking about it, he says that first he thought about this idea of rights of nature as a white thing, but then he was like speaking to the elders and realized that this is a way of translating their cosmovision into law. That has been the problem. The problem is that we have not introduced rights of nature to the law, and that we need to think about this earth jurisprudence. So yes, the tribunals have been very efficient in this sense to also show what's happening to indigenous people, but also we have been able to use those verdicts in real cases, and also to promote and to broadcast many amazing cases. For example, I need to talk about the Atrato River or the Amazon River. That are two cases in Colombia. Colombia doesn't recognize rights of nature in its constitution, but it has recognized that the Atrato River has rights and that the Amazon has rights, and we're promoting a tribunal for the Amazon. So it's a really amazing way to promote the idea that nature has rights, and that these rights need to be heard, and that we are not giving nature rights, that nature has rights, and the legal systems need to recognize those rights, but the nature has rights. That's what's most important.
I just wanted to ask maybe you, Natty, well, and you, Thomas, too. There's sort of a spiritual underpinning to this that we don't talk about. It's not as much in the legal conversation, but the souls of the inhabitants of this planet, both plants and animals, that are at the mercy of one species, and how inequality that we're working on within our own species is a second tier inequality. The original inequality is humans' dominance over all other forms of life. And so rights of nature for me is the beginning of telling the truth, which we kind of all know in our heart of hearts, of something that's been so distorted for so long. So I'm just want to mark the kind of spiritual authenticity and truth of what you're doing, and that the power that the indigenous people summon to do their work always has a spiritual root. And I just want to bring that to this conversation and see if you have any comments about that. Natty, you want to start?
Yeah, I can comment, Lynne, for example, when you all know about the Sarayaku people in Ecuador, and when Sabino Walinga was in the Inter-American Court of Justice, he was brave enough to say that the spirits of the land had left the territory when the explosives were left in their territory. And it was the first time that this spiritual part of the spirits of the land, of the territory, was mentioned in the Inter-American Court. And I feel that the judges did hear his speech. And I remember Patty saying that they were very hesitant to talk about the spirits of the jungle and the forest and the trees. But then they had a meeting with many indigenous people, and they all had this understanding that nature was alive and that the spirits of nature were there, and that some left when there was a big environmental destruction. And this was not only common to people in Ecuador, but it's common to indigenous people around the world. And I feel that the beautiful part of our rights of nature is not only that we have a different metric, like a different indicator of course, we need to have the spirits of the earth here and present, and any activity that might drive them away needs to be stopped. But also an understanding that white people can also start feeling that nature has rights, and that we need to relate to nature as a mother, and that if we don't recognize these rights of nature, then we are not listening not only to the message of nature, but to the message that indigenous people have said in so many ways for so much time. So I definitely feel that is a way of understanding that nature has rights and nature is our mother, and that we need to recognize that it's a living entity, that there are living spirits on the earth, and that they're in the river that needs to be recognized, and they're everywhere, not only in a protected area, but they're everywhere. And that, of course, that means that there cannot be disposable people and disposable places, that we really need to recognize that the earth is alive, and rights of nature is really a tool to promote this understanding.
I also want to say that ecocide, the whole ecocide movement, seems to be very consistent with this. And anything you want to say about that, Thomas? I know the ecocide movement is a legal movement also, but I feel like all of it, if we're willing to acknowledge the spiritual power of what we're doing, it'll give our movement more strength.
Yeah, I think ditto to what Natty said. Also, we have to understand that there are vast forces arrayed against the recognition of rights of nature. The existing system is in place because it works. It works for a relatively few number of people to do what they need to do. And so in the belly of the beast, the United States, moving these laws is not easy. It's very difficult. And in fact, 2 state legislatures, Ohio and Florida, have now passed laws prohibiting municipalities from adopting laws recognizing rights of nature. And we think that's just the beginning of other states as they become threatened with these kinds of laws to do the same. So it's an extremely difficult row to hoe for folks, at least in the US, to move forward with this stuff. But I think, Lynn, going back to your original thought, which is right now we work primarily with frontline communities who are faced with Project X or Project Y. It's basically the only place where we found that white people care enough to actually sacrifice enough to begin driving these laws into place. And it needs to become larger than that. It needs to become preemptive in places that aren't faced with an immediate threat, because the rate of growth that has to happen for rights of nature in the US, at least, it has to happen more quickly. And it has to happen with this greater understanding about our role in the world and our relationship to the earth.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Hey, Thomas, I know one of the major projects you're engaged with right now is the work with the Pachamama Alliance community in Southwest Florida around getting a Rights of Nature initiative passed in this upcoming election season. Could you talk about that a little bit and see how if there's a way people can learn from that or get involved and support that?
Sure. So folks may have been following the environmental crisis, which has been developing in Florida over the past 2 decades. And it includes things like red tide. Folks have been following the die-off of marine life, wearing of masks. You have people, other than COVID, before COVID, pre-COVID, that people were wearing masks on the beach, and backhoes and front loaders are being used to take manatees and dolphins to lift all the dead marine life off the beaches. We tend to think of Florida as a pretty pristine place, but it's not. And it's overdevelopment, it's nutrient load into the waterways. It's basically too many people living in one small place that has caused damage, and phosphate mining and corporations are involved in the mix. And so back in February of 2019, a group of folks in Orange County, Orange County, Orlando area, 1.4 million people in Orange County. It's the 5th largest county in Florida, the 30th largest in the United States. So we're talking big scale county here. That in 2019, a small group of people said, well, hey, everything else has failed the waterways. And as a note to that, Biscayne Bay, people may have seen, Biscayne Bay went to 0 oxygen level recently. A huge fish kill across Biscayne Bay. And it was such an emergency situation, they brought in the firefighting boats to try to lift the water out, to oxygenate it, to feed it back in. That's the type of situation that they arrived at in Biscayne Bay. So crisis situation, people in Orange County said, the small group said, we need to do something. We need to recognize enforceable rights for waterways because nothing else has worked. And so they worked with us to draft an amendment to their county charter. So county charters are like local constitutions, so not just a regular law, but an amendment to the highest level of law that they have in Orange County. And that was in February 2019. The Orange County commissioners, so the county government, appointed a charter review commission, which has to evaluate these proposals. And they evaluated the proposals. They voted the amendment, the proposed amendment, the rights of nature for rivers and waterways in Orange County, to send it to committee. There were a bunch of meetings between December and April of 2020, and this goes back to saying how difficult this is to move these laws because it takes a sustained effort. But eventually the Orange County itself, through the Charter Review Commission, voted to place the amendment onto the ballot for this November. It will be the largest municipality in the United States to actually has the ballots, official ballots, drop at the end of this month, so in 9 days. But people in Orange County will be voting on a Rights of Nature initiative. What does it do? It would recognize the River and other waterways within Orange County, specifically their right to exist, flow, be protected against pollution, and maintain a healthy ecosystem. And along with the rights of nature provisions that are in the law, which make it huge. It's a first for Florida. No other municipality in Florida has these laws in place. It also recognizes the right of people to clean water. So a human right running alongside with the rights of nature in this particular initiative. And we expect a very strong campaign to be run against it by the home builders and other industry within the county. It's fascinating, but they just elected a county commissioner who beat an incumbent in the county who ran on this initiative. So it was a big part of her campaign, and she won overwhelmingly. There are other candidates running for State House and Senate. There's been a statewide organization put together that we helped with, the Florida Rights of Nature Network, which is helping to support this. And of course, the Pachamama Alliance community in Southwest Florida has been an integral part of moving this initiative forward and now launching a campaign to support it. I happen to think it is the most important environmental ballot initiative running in the United States this year. It is that big. And in Florida, we have 13 other communities that are kind of watching what happens in this place. And will be moving forward with initiatives of their own. The Florida legislature has now stepped forward to pass this law, which was signed by Governor DeSantis, to try to prohibit communities from passing rights of nature laws in Florida. And so this group of people sued the state last month to try to constrain preemption. In other words, say there are limits as to what the state legislature can do when it comes to passage of environmentally heightened laws being passed at the municipal level. And people may be familiar with preemption because it was used recently to stop Key West from adopting a sunscreen ban. So certain sunscreens damage coral systems. So they tried to pass a local law banning sunscreen sales within that particular area and use, and that got preempted. Plastic bag bans on plastic straws, all these things are being preempted because legislatures are being used as privatized entities to override these local efforts that are a challenge to what the corporations want to do in those particular areas. So I think it's very exciting what's happening in Orange County right now. It's the biggest thing happening in the United States along the lines of rights of nature. And going back to what Natty and, of course, Bill, you said in the beginning about popularity or gaining acceptance, I see it kind of as normalizing rights of nature as a concept, that the Florida Democratic Party has included a rights of nature plank in its platform. So the Florida Democratic Party coming out in support of these rights of nature laws. The League of Women Voters recently endorsed the Orange County initiative. So the League of Women Voters endorsing a rights of nature law as it's moving. And to my surprise, Bill talked about the Democratic National Party, the DNC, reviewing a proposal to include rights of nature in the 2020 platform. We went back to the 2016 platform, and it did include a rights of nature provisions in the national DNC platform around indigenous peoples. So it said we support indigenous peoples as they move to adopt rights of nature laws. So there's something happening. Florida, they say there's something in the water, I think, that's driving something forward. But what we're seeing in Florida is probably the most systematic movement of rights of nature laws into the political and electoral system than we've seen anywhere else in the United States today. And I think it is the epicenter of the work, and what happens in Florida hopefully will have some echoes in other places in the United States as well.
Thank you, Thomas. Is there I think you had or maybe we have a link to the website for that initiative, and we could put it up so that people want to learn more about this initiative or want to see how they can help out, maybe there's connections, man or person hours they can put into it, or an opportunity to donate to support this, because this initiative needs funding. And is there, Josh, can we put up,
We did it twice.
or it's on, I see, yeah, it's in the chat for everybody.
It says,
Right to Clean Water 2020.
yeah.
So if you want to learn more about this, go to that website. Hey, Thomas, I had one other question. You know, for the other thing I associated you with way back in the early days, rights of nature, but also looking at, but democracy issues and corporate rights, and looking at, if we're really going to get at the root of what we need to get in charge of our legal system, we need to get a democratic process in place that responds to people and not just concentrated power. So are you still, the idea of cleaning up this issue of corporate personhood, corporate rights, is that something you're still involved in? Is the Center for Democratic and Environmental Rights still working in that area? Because I think it's an absolutely essential.
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is that when you work on environmental rights at the local level, or rights of nature at a local level, you run up against a series of obstacles or challenges that have been placed in your path over the last 100 years. And one of those challenges is corporate rights. Because if nature is considered property, and the US Constitution protects your use of property, in other words, your property can't be taken without payment to you of whatever the effect is on that particular property, that what you're trying to do at the local level can be stopped by a lawsuit from a corporation coming in and saying you can't do that. Or if you do it, you owe us money for all the frack gas that you've stopped us from extracting. And so it's almost looking at it as if we decide that local platforms, municipal ordinances, municipal laws are the way to go, because state governments and the federal government are not going to embrace rights of nature anytime within the next 20 to 50 years, depending on your timeline, that you automatically run into these hurdles. And then the question becomes is, how do you dismantle those hurdles? And so the theory is kind of the same, which is that people, at least we assert in courts and in argument, that people have a right of local community self-government, and it's a constitutional right, that they have a constitutional right to govern their own communities. And if they choose to protect ecosystems by passing rights of nature laws, then they have the constitutional right to do so. And that state governments have to be lit and try to preempt those efforts at the local level. Because our theory of social change, you know, as explained in 3.5 minutes, is all about the fact that it doesn't come from above. I think Ecuador was kind of like an opportunity that came along that we had to help with. Because, hey, help us draft a rights of nature law. It's got to come from below. It's only when 2,000, 4,000, 5,000 communities across the U.S., just speaking from a U.S. perspective, passed the up to actually force the kind of state constitutional change that has to happen, as well as the federal constitutional change. Because, at least in my opinion, we need a new federal constitution that's actually a rights and nature constitution, which we don't have now, because nature is not mentioned within the U.S. Constitution. So we basically have a plan of governance that doesn't even mention the basic life support systems that we need to survive. So it's out of whack, and we need to do something about that. But we don't have the physical power or the grassroots organizing force to force that to happen until thousands of communities decide to move in a way that blueprints that change on the way up the ladder. So I think the municipal lawmaking is so important, and the community activism is so important, because as Lynn was saying earlier, this isn't just about laws. It's not just about ink on paper. You can print those off at 100 a clip every day, every afternoon. It doesn't matter. You have to animate those words on that page. This is about a structural shift that's occurring. And what you're doing is using the local laws as an excuse to have a conversation with people about why that structural shift is necessary. This is all about movement building. The laws come at the end, not the beginning. And it's all about this system of figuring out how do we build enough force to actually change the fundamental higher building blocks in the system of law that need to be changed so that we discontinue killing off the planet and killing off ourselves. It's that basic. It's a new relationship with the earth. And it feels uncomfortable to some people to come in through that legal channel. Oh my God, this is the law. It's not really a law at all. It becomes a law. But what it is about changing our brains. It's about rewiring how we think about our relationship with the earth and then reflecting that or codifying it in the way that we write laws for our communities. That's the key.
And maybe just following up what Tom is saying, we were fortunate enough to be in Ecuador to recognize rights of nature in the Constitution of Ecuador. But 10 years later, 12 years later, actually, now we have a really strong base of communities, of indigenous people, and especially of young people who don't even question that nature should have rights. They understand that there's environmental rights that is for people and for people to have a healthy environment, and there's nature rights, and that's quite different. So I'm really grateful for that cultural change that has definitely followed up the constitutional recognition that we had in Ecuador. And that's really quite amazing. And Bill, I also wanted to mention that people can work on rights of nature in many ways. We have been really promoting the idea of gathering signatures for the Universal Declaration. As maybe not all of you guys know, but in 2009, the UN started this dialogue of harmony with nature at the UN. And first Bolivia, but then right now other countries, and Ecuador really wants to promote the idea of a Universal Declaration for the Rights of Mother Earth. Robin Milam was actually here in the call that I want to thank her also for that work, and I've put it in the chat. With Doris Orietti have been following up a whole campaign, a signature campaign to gather signatures to promote the Universal Declaration for the Rights of Mother Earth. And I think it is the right moment for the UN to actually gather these and recognize that nature has rights at a bigger level, not only for Ecuador or for some countries, but actually recognizes that nature should have its rights guaranteed. So I also wanted to share that before our time is up.
Thank you, Natty.
Thank you, Natty. Thank
Wow.
you both, Thomas and Natty. This is fabulous.
My God, there's so much information here and so much power and so much depth. It's such a huge and important part of the future that we all dream of, that we all want, that we all are committed to, and that we want to manifest. And thank you for your leadership, Natty, your intelligence, but also your heart and the courage with which you've been leading this for 12 years. And the years to come. And Thomas, thank you for your excellence and your understanding of the law and your commitment to this new, much more accurate and authentic relationship with the earth and all her creatures. We're so indebted to both of you and everyone who works with you. And thank you all for being part of this conversation. Please, this is recorded. You can share the link with many people and get people to start thinking newly about our relationship with the natural world. And I want to really congratulate the people of South Florida for your landmark work, and may everybody totally tracks for commissioner. All right, a political advisement here. All right. For your work to make this happen in South Florida. If we all get behind this, I know we don't all live there. Some of you do. I see some of you from South Florida community. But if we all can get behind this and talk about it and lift it up and make it visible and financially strong, it's a game changer. So one more thing, I want to announce the next possibility opportunity. The next thing like this was just on October 13th, the day after Indigenous Peoples Day. And it will be with Edgar Villanueva, who wrote Decolonizing Wealth, a really, really amazing book. And he is one of the principals of a foundation that has taken on the decolonizing of wealth. It's going to be a very important conversation. I look forward to having all of you join us and bring anybody and everybody who's interested in these topics. And then finally, I'm going to acknowledge Andres, who I've been watching on the screen. You see him, just his mouth constantly going, his arms waving around. He's actually translating every single word, even Natty, who speaks a little bit faster than I do, and Thomas, who has all kinds of incredible terms that I can't imagine one can translate easily. And here's Andres just translating what I'm saying right now. So thank you for being our translator, our interpreter, our ears and eyes and the sound of this conversation. And thank you all. Bless you, and we'll see you next time. Have a wonderful, wonderful next 2 weeks. Stay safe and get behind the South Florida initiative.
All
Bye,
right.
everybody.
Thank you. Goodbye.